Welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. We're happy today to have a guest with us today, and his name is
Ken Nanes.
And he'll be joining me and my co-host, who is
I am Barney.
And we'll be discussing something very interesting to both Ken and Barney, a show that they're very passionate about, Northern Exposure. So it's just a delight to be gathered here for this, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Barney, to get us started.
Yeah, this Northern Exposure, it is such an interesting show. Sadly, I think because of all of the music that they incorporate into the show, I don't think it is available on any kind of streaming services these days. It's so hard to think about where to begin with describing the show, even because there are so many great characters that are on the show. And I know even that I have bugged Jacob a few times when he's told me that at his same high school that John Corbett was there. And of course that just lights, rings, just sets off what alarms, of going, oh, John Corbett, oh, Chris in the morning. Oh man. And the amazing thing is, his character on the show, they went ahead and just said, why not? And they made him from Wheeling, West Virginia, which of course is right where he's from. And he's one of my favorite characters on the show. But one interesting thing that I read about is, as the DJ in town, he always had a long list of maybe his lines were probably the longest scenes that he had to do. And he would kind of tape cues on Post-it notes around the DJ booth to kind of keep him on the right track, and so that they didn't have to do a number of takes to get things finished for his filming. Yeah, and they actually were able to preserve his DJ booth, his radio booth. The show takes place in Roslyn, Washington, or it takes place in Alaska, but it was filmed in Washington State, in Roslyn, Washington. And one day I hope to be able to go there. And it was through the episode of our show here that we talked about the VW, the Volkswagens, where I just happened to mention offhand the show Northern Exposure. And then Ken reached out to me and said how he also is a very big fan of the show. So I'm curious, Ken, how is it that you first got interested in the show?
Yeah, there's certainly a story there. As I've shared with some people, when I was a secondary teacher, we had a guidance counselor named Jean, and Jean was well respected, hilarious person, great counselor. And I stopped in her office one morning when school had just resumed, and she says, Nanes, there's a show you have to watch. It started this summer as a summer replacement. I said, oh, well, tell me about it. And she said, well, it's called Northern Exposure. It's, supposedly set in Alaska. And I'm thinking, oh, there'll be some nice scenery and such. And she says, yeah, there's a bar owner. He's in his 60s. He has an 18-year-old girlfriend. Okay, 18-year-old girlfriend. All right. There's a radio disc jockey for an AM station in town from Wheeling, West Virginia, who served time in a juvenile detention facility, but yet has these amazing philosophical meanderings to offer over the air. All right. And there's this ultra-rich astronaut who would like to make a commercial disaster out of Alaska. And all right, that's enough for me. She said, and these are not the
right
characters. All right, we'll give this a go. In my mind, I was picturing zany all the time, and it's far from that. There are really some serious issues in cultural education, as you know.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Then, so it's interesting to hear your point of view that you were able to see it from the beginning. I didn't get it probably until it was in syndication. And then I was off and on, and then got the DVDs and finally really got into the show. Were you able to stick with the show during its initial run from the beginning?
Yeah, once. I don't remember how I went back at that point and saw the initial episodes from that summer, but as it resumed in the fall with season 2, pretty much followed it through. It was running, I think, around the time of Seinfeld. So it was one of those things you went to work and talked about the next day, although Seinfeld was a little larger magnitude. But it was fun there were a group of 3 or 4 of us that, would ruminate about what transpired the night before.
You sometimes hear that phrase, life imitating art, imitating life. And I kind of wonder, as you watch the show, how much of it is over the top, fictional, you can't imagine happening in real life. And then how much of it seems grounded and connects with your own experience. And the same question is for both of you. I would love to hear what both of you think about that.
Well, that's a good point, Jacob, because there were cosmic occurrences. Did Joel's mother, Nadine, really fly? This was an episode where, but they would do it so well that the reality of it wasn't necessarily important. It was just done well to give you the thought in your head that perhaps these things were possible.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a really good reference or to put in. Going a little deeper into that episode, it's Joel comes from New York City, and so it's a fish out of water story, kind of, because it's just so much deeper than that. But his mom is so struggling with being busy. She's busy, trying to do something to keep busy, and finally, Joel's receptionist, who is a First Nation woman, gets through to her that she has to be still and she has to be quiet. And only then can she, hear the wind and fly. And she told this receptionist, Marilyn, told the story that, the eagle wasn't always the eagle. I think even she said that the eagle was Yukatangi in Tlingit, if I'm remembering right. And the eagle was so chatty that it couldn't hear anything else happening. And I think maybe the raven said to it, if you're quiet, you can hear the wind and you can fly. And then we see in the episode, right, the same thing, happens to Joel's mom. And then, of course, it has such an interesting way that they wrap it up where Joel and his dad are getting fussy and acting so busy around his mom. And, are you okay? How could you have done this? How did you fall? You really did fall. We got to check you out. And she's being quiet and still and has kind of had this revelation based on that experience. Kind of another episode that came to my mind that kind of brings in one of the devices that they use a lot of dreams is one when Chris's best friend had passed away. And so this is kind of the over-the-top thing, like shipped his body to Chris for burial. And a lot of the episode is focusing on Chris trying to think of what is the right way to give a send-off and also to deal with the passing of his very best friend and of all the things that they went through together. And one of the dream sequences that they have in there is Chris is at the Last Supper, and it's they kind of don't quite get all the names right. John and Luke and Mark are there. Luke shouldn't be there, but and then his friend, who's passed away is kind of singing a song. It's some fairly well-known kind of bit actor, and kind of Chris, it kind of comes that he realizes through this dream kind of the right way to send his friend off. But throughout the episode, he's getting different points of view of how to deal with death and passing and people's memories. And it makes me think of the episode we had, again, the Volkswagen episode again, where Adam Ant is in this episode as well. And he mentions how his philosophy is that when people pass away, like kind of who they were, essences of who they were kind of remains in the things that they love the best and leave behind. And I really thought about that when we were talking about, sorry, I can't remember the pastor's name.
Sean Hilliard.
Yeah, Sean Hilliard, his uncle passing away, and how they have such a deep connection with those Volkswagens together.
Oh, that's wonderful detail. And Chris, of course, is a minister of sorts,
right?
Utilized in very different ways as the show.
Yeah.
I think it was the Church of Youth and Beauty or something like that, or something in beauty. And he always says he answers an ad. He answered an ad in the back of Rolling Stone.
Rolling Stone, yeah. Quick backstory on Marilyn. Now that you mentioned her, it's such a unique character. She brought her mother to auditions, so her mother could audition for a part in the program. And while she's there, they say, her name's Elaine. Elaine, we'd like you to read. Elaine gets the job. Mom does not, although Mom did make some appearances, throughout the show. Elaine Miles is incredible. She apparently is a hyperactive, chatty, in real life kind of person, which you can't imagine. She had very few lines, but her face had many ways to convey the meaning of what needed to be done. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And
she had no experience acting whatsoever.
Yeah. I know that she is like a tribal dancer, very well respected, and she does dance in a few episodes, but that makes me think of the episode where I think Joel was away, maybe teaching something, or maybe at a conference or something, and she takes over the practice and starts seeing the patients, and actually maybe seems more competent than what Joel was.
Or when she provided the mud stuff.
Oh yeah, when everyone had the flu.
Had the flu.
Yeah.
And eventually Joel begrudgingly has to say, well, Marilyn, perhaps it worked. And she says nothing. She just looks at him.
Yeah. And that is kind of one of the themes that runs throughout the show, of characters needing to change and adapt. And that's one thing that the show does so well, is that the characters really do grow and change a lot. But yeah, Joel has so much trouble with, accepting things that aren't in the AMA, and American Medical Association. And yeah, exactly. He, not until he gets the flu, or his girlfriend gets the flu, does he think that maybe, what is it? Hayo ipsinayo, I think is what they called it. Might also pungent and smell might actually be worth it.
Good.
So you mentioned there, Barney, that the idea of growth happening, of change in the characters is a big part of the show, or one of the themes. Are there a few other themes of the show that either of you would like to highlight that stand out to you, that were threads that were carried throughout, that were particularly meaningful or interesting?
One thing that
Ed Chigliak yet.
Sorry. One theme that I don't know if it's a theme. One thing that I noticed, and I'm so curious as to how it came about, but there are a number of references to Japan, and there are a few characters who are supposed to be Japanese in the show, and I'm just so curious why or how it came about, but kind of connected with that, maybe folklore. is one theme that really runs throughout it.
Mm.
There's an episode where a bunch of Japanese tourists are there for the Northern Lights, and they kind of give a story as to why they're there. And actually, I checked this with my wife, and she says it's not true. That's not the reason why people in Japan are so concerned about the Northern Lights. But one interesting kind of connection with this folklore that I really find interesting is Marilyn has a cousin who is a shaman, and he finds that like kind of tribal stories are really essential to getting to why the patient is sick, or helping the patient to be healed. And he spends an episode trying to figure out what are kind of the Western. I'm trying to blank as to what I should really call this, and it's not tribal stories, but
like narratives or legends or myths,
maybe what is it that we're it's on the tip of my tongue as to what the phrases that he used, but so in their tradition, they would tell certain stories for certain things, and he's kind of thinking, what is it about the West that Western culture that has kind of a similar feel to it, and for all the people that he interviews, everyone kind of tells these stories, that we hear kind of like urban myths is what he gets a load of, and he thinks that instead of for healing, they're meant to scare people, they're meant to give people the heebie-jeebies, they're meant to kind of drive a gap in a wedge in between, kind of make people take distance instead of causing any kind of healing. And that was kind of something interesting that I found about that aspect of the show.
Wow, thanks for sharing, Barney. That is really interesting.
Interesting perspective.
Were you about to say something, Ken, a little earlier about this idea of themes?
No, I don't think so.
Did some of those points resonate with you? Do you remember that thread in the story about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, shaman was a big deal, to put it kind of surfacey, throughout the program, and the different philosophies that, of course, clash with Joel the New Yorker medically. And I was starting to mention Ed Chigliak. Ed is a young man in the town of Sicily who eventually begins his training to become a shaman, as well as a very vested interest in producing movies. He's a movie freak. He really, so he had those diverse interests. And Barney, I know you'll remember this. Ed is just Ed. In the beginning of the series, one of the recurring themes was Ed will just walk into anyone's home or business unannounced and feel like this is what we do. And Joel, of course, is aghast because he'll show up at Joel's cabin. Joel's already a hyperactive mess because of animal sounds outside the cabin and gunshots that will just randomly occur. And suddenly Ed will be sitting in Joel's bedroom, hi, Dr. Fleischman. And, Joel about has a heart attack, but Joel has to understand that this is what we do up here. And
yeah. That's really a lot of times we see Ed, exactly, coming in at the wrong time or unexpectedly, and just being there. And his character is also one that has really, really grows a lot. And the very first episode, he picks him up, and Ed is, it kind of feels like he's like a really cool guy. He's like asking Joel, do you like this kind of music? Do you like this kind of music? And then, it's in a few episodes later is when he gets, the movie bug or the directing bug, and starts really getting interested in movies. And, right later he, accepts the calling to become a shaman. And you kind of see the way that it kind of changes his direction in his life, even though he still does hang on to that hope to be a movie maker in the end. But yeah, and another character we haven't talked about, played by Barry Corbin, was Maurice, right? Maurice Minifield, the millionaire astronaut, fighter pilot in the Korean War. And Ed works for him to, clean his house and run errands and things like that. And one episode that I was just thinking of, they have, Maurice is a very gruff person, and they have kind of a tense relationship at times.
Yes.
And there's one episode near the end where Maurice hopes that Ed will kind of, again, trying to get Sicily on the map. We'll have a Sicily film festival, and Ed kind of doesn't get it off the ground, and Maurice gets mad at him and says things that he regrets. And at the end of the episode, they just share, Ed did something and he was sorry, and they just share this really, really meaningful exchange that I think probably was beyond the characters, was probably very, very personal. The way that you get the sense that they were sharing together, it was just really, really nice.
Yeah, it's a nice recollection. Yeah. Ed, I think he was portrayed to find some balance in his life, because he, as you said, he worked for Maurice, who was incorrigible at times. He also worked in the local general store with Ruth Ann Miller, who we haven't mentioned yet. Ruth Ann Miller, played by Peg Phillips. Another unique backstory. Peg was an accountant in real life, retired at age 65, enrolled in the University of Washington drama school, had never acted, and started getting some little jobs, and read for the part of Ruth Ann, who was cast. She was good for Ed when Ed was at the low moments in his life.
But you were talking there just now about how the show did a really good job at certain key moments, and how the characters were sensitive to each other, or how they reconciled. I wanted to go back to what you were talking about earlier about this intercultural dynamic between the New Yorker and the local Inuit, context, and ask, how does the show handle intercultural things? Do you think they do it well, with sensitivity? Like, are there lots of layers of the intercultural experiences? Because that's such a big theme of our podcast. I just would love to hear what your take is on how the show does that. I'm assuming with much humor, but yeah, what are your reflections on that intercultural dynamic of the show?
Yeah, one episode that I hoped we would talk about is the episode that they won an Emmy for, called Soulmates, and they spell it Seoul. Yeah, from Korea. And this episode takes place during Christmas. One really interesting thing about the show, just an aside, they only ever do each holiday once. They don't have an annual Halloween show or something like that. They only do holiday once. So this is the Christmas episode that they did. And Joel is having trouble, as someone who's Jewish, he's surrounded by, he doesn't have anyone to around him to think about Hanukkah or something, non-related to Christmas. And he gets attracted to Christmas and has trouble dealing with that. And to make it even harder for him, the Inuit people have a different kind of take on the Christmas tradition as well. There are lots of Christmas trees and lights and whatnot, but there's also lots of ravens that they decorate the town with. As the pageant that they have, that for kind of the Christmas pageant, kind of tells the story of how the raven brought the sun back to the earth. I think it was maybe in the hands of a greedy child, maybe took it and was playing with it, and the raven managed to get it back. And so they really, it's so interesting to see the combination of what we think of Christmas and kind of traditional Christmas ideas with blended in with how the First Nation people are celebrating kind of maybe something that takes place at the same time or incorporated in Christmas as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the main story in that episode is as when Maurice was serving in Korea, he now finds out that he has a son and a grandson too, and they come to visit him, and he has a really hard time coming to terms with this, as he is very conservative, and he even mentions he hopes to have a son one day, but he thought of having someone who looked more like him, as opposed to someone that was of multiracial. And again, the way that they I'm curious to hear what you think about this episode too, Ken, but the way that they bring everything together with the reconciliation is really, really well done, I think.
Yeah, it was magnificently done. Maurice, of course, immediately, what do you want? What do you want? I mean, I'll get the checkbook. And then it does evolve into with there's a language barrier too, but there's an understanding that eventually evolves, which was,
Yeah, it gets really rocky. His son doesn't know how to express himself in English and sings "Fly Me to the Moon" for karaoke, and he replaces the lines with in other words, "Daddy, kiss me," and it just Maurice's face just becomes hard as a rock and a giant scowl. And by the end of the episode, though, he finds so many things to respect about this son, and is just so touched by what a great job that his this son's mom did in raising him without the husband to be around.
Sure. Yeah. So Jacob, the answer to your questions is yes, 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 yes. And you mentioned the comedic factor. It's always underlying, but as Barney said, that there is conflict and there are issues. I was thinking of, Barney, the episode about the totem pole. When you start to think of conflict, and a totem pole was created, and there was something extremely offensive on it that had to be dealt with, and it just was a separating fact in the town, and that was an episode that was tough all the way through. It just
we see even they do a good job of showing that there's differences even amongst the First Nation people, Bear Clan and Salmon Clan, Raven Clan, and that was one where members, they were cousins but different clan members, and they couldn't reconcile this telling of history through the totem pole, because one felt that one thing happened and one felt that wasn't the way it happened at all, and they had a real cold spell between the two for a while.
Are you aware of any times when the show was trying to speak to contemporary issues of the time? And can you say a little bit about that, how it responded to the era in which it was filmed?
Well, for me, immediately comes to mind Ron and Eric, introduced as gay men who Maurice found despicable, but Maurice also saw the side of them that was, we're going to open the B&B, and that's going to bring dollars to the town, and he could see that part of it. And there was a marriage as well, and that really that spoke to early, I think, earlier than many of the programs on network TV did to that particular aspect of human life.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, this was maybe 1992, 93
Yes.
or so. And another great episode, one of my favorites. I really like Ron and Eric a lot. And but yeah, in that episode, um, Eric, Eric and Ron and Maurice were always at odds. They sometimes really kind of had a mutual respect for each other. And then sometimes Maurice was very, very hard with them. And sometimes one or two times they kind of gave it to Maurice as well. But as much as Maurice disapproved of them, and as often as he said, one time they were going to go see, Les Mis in Anchorage or something. And then Maurice, do you want to ride with us? And he said, I can't be seen with you guys. I have, business associates in Anchorage. I can't assume to have people think that I validate that lifestyle. And as much contempt as they had for each other at times, in that episode, Eric is just at odds, very conflicted, and he goes to Maurice for advice, and just Maurice is just acting as the perfect father at that time. And it's another of those moments that there's a lot of these moments that you just don't see on TV, and they just feel so genuine. And that whole episode really sticks out in my mind, but especially that part.
Well, are there any other aspects of the show that either one of you would like to talk about before we draw our episode to a close?
Maybe 100.
Yeah, I know. Yep.
Jacob, we really could go on and on and probably will someday in the privacy of our own little FaceTime or.
There's nothing saying we can't have multiple episodes in this, this vein.
I hope so.
Why not? Installments over time.
Yeah.
Well, I have to mention one of my all-time favorite episodes is called Spring Break. Part of it comes to mind because in Ohio, Barney said it's in the 50s in Japan, so they're living in a balmy, Florida-like atmosphere there, where we're tough people and we're just wanting this to be over and get to spring. And in Alaska, of course, it's magnified 1,000 times, and eventually the ice breaks and the water will flow. But it was another one of those multifaceted episodes. Holling, the bartender, the man in his 60s that has the young girlfriend, he wants to fight everyone, and this will help to get his frustrations out. So there was that part. There's petty thefts all over town, and Maurice meets his eventual girlfriend, Barbara Stefanski, who is a dyed-in-the-wool officer who goes by. If Maurice is by the book, Barbara is 10 times that. And, we got to get to the bottom of this. And Ed figures out that Chris is the thief. And, why, Chris, would you do such a thing? And I'm going to misquote Chris, but it was such a wonderful moment. Chris said something like, Ed, sometimes you have to do bad things just to feel like you're alive. And it's the end of winter, and that was Chris's end of the winter. And then the most memorable moment of all would be the running of the bulls in this episode. Once the water starts flowing, all the men in town disrobe, throw back some whiskeys, and run through the town like a parade, completely naked. And it's just part of what they do in the spring there. And of course, Fleischman is still relatively new, and he's not going to do this. And he goes into where they're all getting ready and finally acquiesces and goes out screaming, with all the rest of them, and does see the joy in this moment to let's get to spring. So but I went on a long time there, but it's just an incredible television show.
That episode is so good. Oh. I really like that one. I love how they have a potluck and everyone brings lasagna. And then Joel brings Jello. And then when Holling is fighting someone finally, all of the people watching are knitting. And it's just so interesting, that episode.
It's not that big a deal.
Yeah. And they reference that episode later, when right, Chris is next gone, and he leaves. He jumps his parole and goes to Alaska, and he's trying to get extradited back to West Virginia. He is Chris Stevens, and then the person who wrote up the orders, like Teddy Miller or something, and it's a Miller-Stevens feud that has been going on for generations. And he says, well, there's the answer. That's why they're trying to get me out of there. And they're having a trial to basically, there's a lawyer on that's in there at the time, and you're trying to establish who is Chris Stevens. Is this really Chris Stevens? And Ed is on the stand, and he tells that story where Chris is the one stealing all these things, and he says what he said, and then the lawyer just doesn't know what to think, and then Chris looks at Ed, and he just gives him this beautiful approving look. He's like, that's right. He's like, you remembered what I taught you. Yeah. And that's just great. I love the whimsical aspect of the show, and kind of how they intentionally don't let you place the show, the location. We never talked about Maggie.
No, surprise.
A Bush pilot whose father was like CEO of GM Motors or something, and she's always talking about these taxis that she's flying. And she's like, yeah, I went to Sitka, and I went to Nome, and I went to Skagway, and I went here and here, and every place is just so far away that you can't tell, well, where would Sicily be in Alaska? And of course we never talked about another one of my favorite characters that comes from my favorite episode. It's I think it's called The Big Feast.
Oh,
and yeah,
in my top 3.
Oh yeah. And it's Adam, and who's a pathological liar, but everything he says tends to be true. and of course his wife, who is Eve, who is a hypochondriac. Yeah. And they're just so interesting as well.
Look, that was a big episode for Eve, because she was a hypochondriac in every episode, except in this episode. She saves the day. The young girl breaks a bottle of wine worth $5,000 that was to be used at the feast, and she's just freaked. She does. Adam is a gourmet chef and a taster of many fine wines. Eve puts together this formula to replace the wine, and they glue the bottom of the broken bottle back together. Eve feels firmly that they'll never be able to tell the difference. So it comes time in this ornate and just top meal for the tasting of the wine. Now you know that Maurice and Adam are going to get the first taste, and Shelley is just about there to lose her mind, and Eve's nervous too, but they pull it off. The bouquet. Eve saves the day.
And that episode was just also beautiful to see. The production in that one was just beautiful.
Yeah, that was like a Downton Abbey banquet.
Oh yeah.
More so.
Yeah.
And that also introduced another character. Maurice purchased this expensive violin, hires a guy named Cal to come play the violin.
Yeah.
Cal, this violin is nothing like he's ever touched in his life. And he becomes a recurring character who they address the issue of addiction, not by drugs or alcohol, but by Cal's addiction to this violin, he almost kills Maurice to get to the violin. And in the end, Maurice sort of understands Cal's passion in this way, and sort of forgives him. Great. Yeah.
As you both were talking there about the feast and about this kind of way of talking about addiction, it feels like the show is delving into like the human condition and like helping examine like layers of why the motivation for why we do what we do, but it also is kind of doing it in a way that seems redemptive. It sounds like you're saying like there's often an outcome that is hopeful, the results. And so in that sense, do you think the show, if it has a kind of overarching tone or message, is one that elevates the viewers, that it brings them to a better place? Is that part of its goal, do you think, to help edify or encourage?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris, and I think that's maybe one of Chris's main roles in a number of episodes. A lot of episodes kind of end with him giving some long reflective passage, and he references a lot of works of literature that I have yet to read. And he brings it together, and the subtlety of the things that he says and the music that they usually have playing when he's saying these things, it just brings such a peaceful and reflective end to the episodes, and so much so that I always maybe pause or end the episode right before the credits roll, because the credits roll with the end credits roll with the same theme music, and it's nice upbeat music, but it gets in my heart, it gets in the way of the final message, and so I never want to hear that at the end. I just want to be left with this just wonderful, warm, reflective feeling that the show usually leaves you with.
Yeah, I was struck by that too, Barney. And there were times when I did the same thing, and I was surprised with all the insight and writing and music choices that they didn't let it play over at times. But yeah, agree.
Yeah.
Well, Ken and Barney, it has been a real delight to delve into this world with you. I feel like you're my tour guides, and you've described so many things about the surroundings of this world, and it makes me really want to see the show now. I haven't seen it yet. So thank you for sharing that and for being on this podcast today. What a joy. And maybe I'll turn it over to you, Barney, to take us out.
Yeah, it is, of course, sad that we have to let this episode go. And we thank you very much for sticking with us throughout this. As my one friend say, that we just go on and on about something. We say that we were tubing about things. So Ken and I were tubing together here about Northern Exposure. And we hope that you could see and get a sense of the passion that we have for the show. And we hope that you think that maybe it's justified. And we also encourage you to find a way to watch the show somehow, and with an open mind, and with the time and to get immersed into the stories and the characters. And we look forward to future episodes where we'll talk about other passions, other hobbies that we share, myself and Jacob as well. And we hope that you're looking forward to those episodes and joining us again next time. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you then.